Hi, my name is Oliver, and in this video I'll be teaching you how to animate dripping water in After Effects. So to get started, I have illustrated this water tap, and just sort of a droplet of water that's about to form underneath, so you can see the tap on top and then the water on the bottom. Now if you want to follow along with this tutorial or take a deeper look at the project file, that will be linked down below. So the way we're actually going to do this is not by animating frame by frame, which is how you'd usually go about animating something like water. We'll try and use some effects and fewer keyframes to get sort of the same result, so you can animate this quicker and much more easily. So to get started, we'll actually start with this droplet. Now, this droplet is just a very simple ellipse that you could actually just draw in After Effects if you'd like. You could go to the ellipse tool and just draw it out. It's as simple as that. And this is sort of the base for our water droplet. So our water droplet will be split into the space and then the drop that will come out of it. So first we're going to change the anchor point. Now we can go and select the pan behind tool, click it and hold down Command or Control on Windows, and it will snap to the top. So the way we're going about doing this is that this will sort of be hidden, and then we will animate the scale a bit down so it becomes visible, and then as the water droplet comes out of it, it will bounce back up. But let's start with the first part. So we can actually press S as in scale and add a keyframe for the scale at the start. Now we want to unlink these proportions so they're not constrained, so we can actually move them individually. Now you have to remember that for animations like this, it's pretty important to keep the sort of volume. So if we start to scale this out like this, we'll also have to scale it in, so it keeps that volume. So we're going to actually scale it up here. So we'll have to drag it out a bit more, but just so it's not visible. Now it doesn't really matter the shape at the start, it just doesn't have to be visible. And then we can go, let's say 40 keyframes ahead. So hold down Command or Control, Shift, and then press the right arrow key 4 times. And then we can sort of start to animate this down like this. So it just becomes visible, so you can see it's sort of forming a water drop. Now, this is just sort of the standard thing that will be at the tap, but then we'll actually create the water drop itself. So the way we go about doing this is actually just picking the ellipse tool. Now we have to get the right fill. So let's just go to the fill and use the eyedropper tool to get that color. And we can just sort of drag out an ellipse in the opposite direction, something sort of like this. And again, we'll select the anchor point of it, just select it like this, and we'll sort of snap it to the top of it, like that. So we actually need this behind everything, and we can just call this the drop. And we want to sort of align it in the center. And now we have to remember that this has to also not be visible at the start. And for this one, we'll be animating the position as well as the scale. So press P and S. To get those two, we can right click the position and separate the dimensions. And we're only going to animate the Y position, so that's the vertical. So add a keyframe for each one of these. Now, maybe we have to adjust the water drop a bit at the start, so it's not as long. And then we go towards the end here, and now you have to imagine that it will come out of this initial sort of drop that's forming on the tap. Now, if you need some reference for this, you can just take a look at your water tap when it's sort of dripping. And this won't be 100% realistic, but it's sort of very close and we can get away with it. So we need to pull this down so it's forming that drop. And now we also have to sort of adjust the scale, because you have to imagine that the gravity is pulling on this water droplet, so it will be elongated. So it will be thinner and it will be longer. So not too much, but let's just try something like this. You can sort of see how this comes out. And right now this looks nothing like a water drop, but that's because we haven't applied any effect or any easing yet. But before we do that, let's actually animate the drip itself, the way it drips onto the floor. And we could go, let's say 8 keyframes for this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's just by holding down Command and Control on Windows and clicking the right arrow key. And we want it to be sort of on the ground. And now we also want to change the scale. So you have to imagine that as it falls, gravity will keep on pulling it, so it will be longer and longer. But as it hits the bottom, it will sort of splash out on the floor, if you imagine that there's a floor right here. So actually we can add a keyframe for the scale here and just go, let's say 2 keyframes before, and this will be where it's elongated. So it will actually be longer, sort of like this. And then at the very end here, then it will splash out. You have to remember to keep those proportions, sort of. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because it's water, so it's liquid. It can go all over the place. But just sort of something like this. Now again, it looks very weird when we haven't applied easing, but we'll make it look like it's sort of elongating and then it splashes out just at the end. So maybe this is a bit too long and we don't really get the effect of it elongating. So the way we can do this is just make it a bit thicker, drag it a bit more upwards so you can get that effect. Now we also want it to not just be still, just as it has splashed out, because water will sort of go in all directions. It won't just be still on the surface. And we can go, let's say 8 keyframes ahead again. And right now you don't really have to think that much about the volume. So what we're going to do here is actually just drag it out just a tiny bit so we get a bit of motion. But now we have actually come to the interesting part, and this is the easing and the effects that we will be applying. So we can start with the easing, and we start with the scale and the Y position. So if we do the scale first, we'll just press F9 to ease it, go into the graph editor, and you can see the scale is split up into the 2 different scales, the X and the Y scale. And we just want the scale to be sort of linear at the start, and then drag it in a bit towards the end, like this. And with the Y position, we just select the keyframes and ease them. And right here, again, we want maybe a bit of linear at the start. And then we have to imagine that the curve has to be smooth. So this handle has to go into the other handle, so we have to line it up. And now you have to imagine that gravity is pulling on this drop, and therefore it will sort of go slow at the start, but as it moves down and it's released from the tap, the water tap, the speed will increase and it will accelerate. So it will be fastest towards the end. So you can see this is sort of the change of value over time, which means that it will be slow and steady at first, but then as it's released, it will accelerate. Now, if you don't see this curve, you can go down here and select the value graph. And now we can actually animate the scale, or ease the scale, that is, of the drop. So we can just select these keyframes and press F9. And maybe we'll need a bit more space for this, so we can actually see what we're doing. And it's sort of the same at the start. We get that linear easing. Now it's pretty hard to actually grab these handles because they're so close to each other, but we can sort of make it work. And then here towards the end, we just want to ease it so it's in the middle of the 2 keyframes. So that's a nice easing for most of the time. And we also want to do that with the last part here. But then you have to imagine this is the part where the drop sort of gets wider just towards the end. So we'll do sort of the same easing here, but we will make it sort of de-accelerate so it smoothens out the motion, so it doesn't just stop very quickly or very abruptly. And we can sort of try and drag these keyframes out. And this is the first try, so this probably doesn't look perfect, but we can go in and adjust it a bit later. So if we actually just zoom out a bit, zoom out here so we can actually see what's going on. Let's take a look at this animation. So you can see at first it looks all right, but then right here towards the end, it gets pretty harsh. But that's just something that we can try and adjust some of the keyframes, some of the easing. So you can see right here. So this is really just about tweaking and sort of trying to get this right. So this might be a problem with the easing. So as you can see right here, we want it to happen maybe a bit later. So we can drag these handles in and drag these handles out. Sort of get that same effect. Sort of like this. But I think actually it's fine for now because it may look a bit sharp, but when we start to apply effects and everything, it will sort of smoothen it out. But we also need to animate this water at the top to sort of bounce back. So you can see that if we open up all of the keyframes right here towards the end, it's sort of the water droplet that's dragging this top portion downwards. So when the water droplet is released, that will sort of go back. So we can just go to the end of the animation, you could say right here. And we can just copy the first keyframe and paste it. So it's scaled right back. And right here, we'll do some easing, just some very standard easing to sort of make that work. So you can see right now it's maybe a bit too slow, but we can just drag this keyframe in a bit. So maybe we want it right around here. So you can see it's sort of released. Now to sort of make the water at the top and the drop blend together, we'll go ahead and add an effect called Gaussian Blur. So that this will just blur out the water itself. So maybe we can go for 45 and we'll copy that to the drop. And as you can see, they're just blurred together. But of course we want a very sharp vector look. And therefore we can just select the water and the drop, right click and pre-compose. We can just call this the drop. And now we'll use an effect called Simple Choker. So what this essentially does is that it sort of looks at the edges and tries to make them sharper. So it cuts off some of this blur, but it initially blends the two shapes together in a much smoother way. Because when we had it before without the blur, we can just go in here and take a look. You can see that it's very sharp, the transition between the two shapes, but it will sort of smoothen that out. So enable the effect again, and we'll just search for the Simple Choker and drag that onto the drop. And then we can drag it out until we get an effect that we like. So right here, you can see that it's already smoothing it out. Maybe we want something like 25. Try and play that back. And as you can see, we get this water drop effect. Now, after applying this Simple Choker, you might want to go into the composition again and do some adjusting on the easing, just to get that look that you're really going for here towards the end. And again, this might be a bit too sharp. So we can just go in and try and adjust that a bit again. So if we take a look here, maybe we actually want to take the endpoints and drag them out a bit. And really this is all about tweaking. You could sit here tweaking these graphs for hours to sort of make it work. And it does take time, but that's really just the sacrifice that you're going to make before you get everything perfect. So maybe we can also try and adjust the Y position. That could also cause some of this. See how this should be dragged out. So you can see it gets maybe a bit too far down. So we can actually just drag this out. And that way you create a better effect. And go to the main composition again. And now you maybe want some of the water at the top, the sort of initial water up here, to be a bit more visible. And the reason why we don't see much of it is because of the Simple Choker that has cut it off. But we can just take that water and sort of adjust the scale animation. So we can just make it come down a bit further here in the middle. So you actually see a bit more. Now this is maybe a bit too much, but you can sort of adjust it so you get what you like. And every time you try and animate this, you get very different results because it's really about the easing and how you adjust the keyframes and everything like that. So you just have to try and make it work. Now, when we have gotten this animation, we actually want to make the water disappear here at the ground. So just when it hits the ground, we actually want to go in and we want to copy the drop, paste it into our main composition. Then we press U and we just delete every single keyframe and we delete the Gaussian blur. Now we take the pan behind tool and we just snap the anchor point to the center. And now we just adjust the timing. So what we want is really for this shape to cover up the other shape. So we can add a scale animation. So apply keyframe to the scale, and then we can go, let's say 8 keyframes ahead. Add another keyframe, and here at the start, we just want to set these two scales to 0. And now we have to make sure that towards the end, it's sort of the same shape as the other drop. So we'll just adjust it so it sort of fits. And you can see here, it's right around here. Then we take these two keyframes and press F9 to ease them. And we just add a bit of easing here at the end keyframes, sort of like this. And now you have to select the drop, and you have to select a track matte, and you select alpha inverted matte, which just means that it makes the drop disappear. So if we zoom out, we also want to maybe apply a bit of an effect, so the water doesn't look that still all the time. It's a bit too smooth right now for my liking. So we'll just search for Turbulent Displace, add it onto the drop. And right here you can see that right now it's a bit extreme. It looks very wobbly. So you'll initially just turn down the size and the amount. And then we'll alt click the evolution. And we can just type in something like time times 100, which initially just animates the evolution with 100 degrees every second. So we just get a bit of movement, and we can adjust this until we get something that we like. So right now you can see that we have this animation. You can zoom out, try and play it back. And you can see that there's sort of a bit of the water visible here towards the end. We can easily fix that if we go to the end of this drop. And we just take the drop and the sort of track matte, and we press Command or Control Shift D and delete the layers. So we just completely remove it right there towards the end. And also if you want a bit of this effect, sort of the turbulent displace onto the track matte, you can also just apply it there. And as you can see, we have animated this water drop. So one of the reasons why you can see that it's a bit harsh on the transition here is because the water becomes very elongated, and it has to change from one extreme to another extreme. So you can initially fix this if you go into the drop composition, you select the drop, and then you have to animate the scale. So you just have to make it less extreme here. So maybe a bit wider, bit smaller, sort of like this. And you can see that the transition will initially become smoother. So right up here, you can also make it a bit more choppy. So the extreme is up here and not down here at the bottom as much. So maybe something sort of like this. But again, this is also about really adjusting this and spending your time adjusting it. But we can try and preview what it looks like right now. So as you can see, you will eventually end up with a smoother result. And again, you can spend as much time as you'd like, sort of tweaking this and adjusting it to get it perfect. But I think this is actually fine for now. And now if we want to get a bit more extreme, we can add a bit of animation to the tab itself. Now the tab won't really be affected by this water drop if it was in real life, but we can add a bit of rotation just to make it look a bit more interesting here in After Effects. So we can actually take the tab and we take the rotation at the start, add a keyframe, and then we go to the point where the drop is about to release, so right around here. and we just add a bit of rotation, so it rotates a bit downward, sort of like this, and then a bit after, right around here, we'll just make it rotate up again. So maybe, let's say 0.8 in the opposite direction, so we get a bit of wiggle, and we can go around 4 or 5 keyframes ahead, and we'll just make it settle to 0. So we can take these keyframes and press F9, go into the graph editor, and here we can just sort of create this easing. So just a very standard easing, just in between the keyframes. Now in this animation, we don't really want to parent the drop to the tab, because that way it will get rotated and it will look weird. But we do want it to follow it a bit, because as you can see, we lose a bit of the top part of the drop here at the start. So we can just add a keyframe at the start, go to the point where it's the most rotated, and we'll just adjust the position. So you can see it sort of lines up, and we can copy the first keyframe, and just when it hits, paste that. Then we can actually go ahead and ease this. So this should be eased the same way as the rotation of the tab. So we actually need to use the speed graph for this one, because the position isn't split up, and just drag in the handles a bit, not too much, sort of like this. And we can go ahead and take a look at the animation. So as you can see, it follows, and we just get that slight rotation of the tab. Now maybe it's a bit too extreme here at the end. If we go into the value graph and just get a bit more space, you can see that we can drag this portion down a bit, maybe give it a bit more time. This should look better. Yeah. So this is the sort of animation that you will get. You can see that, of course, you can get better results by animating this frame by frame, but I think this is a pretty good alternative to that if you don't really have the time, or if you just sort of like this more simplistic look better. And again, this could be made a lot better if I spend some time tweaking it a lot more. And I suggest that you actually spend the time tweaking it and trying adjusting the keyframes, see what looks good. But I really hope that you enjoyed the video. Again, if you want to follow along, there's a link down below where you can download the project file, and you can use my illustration to try and recreate the effect. Or just take a look at my keyframing and my easing and see exactly what I did. Now, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment down below and tell me what I should do next, if you learned something from this video, or if you could use it in any of your future projects. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to get notified when I upload future videos. That's all for now, till next time.